This conversation is part of the James J. Blanchard Living Library of Michigan Political History, a project of the Michigan Political History Society.
I'm Doug Ross, and I'm here interviewing Morley Winograd. Mr. Winograd, you want to explain who you are, when you were born, and where you were born?
I was born in Detroit. I spent the first 50 years of my life in Detroit. 1942, a member of what's called the silent generation, and I've had the privilege of being a player in Michigan political history.
You went to high school?
Went to Berkeley High.
And college?
Went to University of Michigan.
And then at a pretty young age, not too long after college, you got elected chair of the Oakland County Democratic Party. So tell me what was going on, what was happening to the party, and what was your role or purpose going in at that time? How did it happen?
Yeah, I got elected, I got involved in Democratic Party politics in 1968. There was obviously a great tumult in the party at that time, the reform movement, the McGovern-Kennedy efforts and so forth. But mine was a more personal reason for getting involved. I had just moved to Troy, and my brother, my younger brother, had been hired as a deputy director in that summer to run a voter registration campaign for the county party. And they couldn't find anybody in Troy. It was a relatively new suburb, township forever, but in terms of residents, very little. And so he asked me if I would undertake the registration drive. And I didn't know, I was always interested in politics, but didn't know anything about the mechanics. But I undertook it, and when the election was over, I got a call from the county party saying, look, under state rule, we have to have 2 people from every township or city on our county executive committee. Would you be willing to serve from Troy? The only other fellow we have on there from Troy is this guy named Ken Morris, who's the regional director for the UAW for Oakland County. And he doesn't come to meetings that often, so we'd like you to serve. And I said yes. They asked me to serve in the Rules Committee because, again, rules and reform were big in our party activity at the time. And through that, I got involved relatively heavily with internal politicking in Oakland County Democratic politics. The county party chairman, George Gugasian, at the time, decided not to run again in 1970, and they turned to me and asked me if I would serve as chairman. That's how I got started.
And what was the nature of Michigan Democratic Party politics? Where was the party? What was going on? What was happening?
Well, we were busy fighting amongst ourselves. We'd lost the governorship a few elections before that, and so the contest was really focused on national issues. We had folks who had supported either McGovern or Kennedy over the Vietnam War versus the Humphreyites and their labor allies, and that was the main division. In fact, when I started, I was considered a member of the reform movement. That same brother had served as Bobby Kennedy's point person for some of the convention stuff, later George McGovern, after Kennedy's assassination. And so that's where I came out of, but I actually decided that the labor movement knew more about what they were doing and ended up being their close ally.
And was the Liberal Labor Coalition that was put together, I assume, by Soapy and
Martha
Ruther
Griffiths
and so forth?
And Hux Griffiths.
Right. Was that coming apart at that point over
Vietnam? It had fallen apart over Vietnam. I knew nothing about any of that history. I learned it all later. But that was where the delegates split. In fact, the reason I got elected county chair is that at the 68 convention, the fellow who thought he was in line for the county chairmanship after Gugasian retired, whose name unfortunately I no longer remember, had voted not with Labor for Humphrey, but either for McGovern or Kennedy. And Labor decided that if they couldn't trust him on that vote, they couldn't trust him to be county chairman.
And how did that then develop into the state chairmanship, and when did that happen?
Well, when I got elected county chairman in 1970. We had a very successful election with Phil Hart's reelection. I served prior to my election as chairman as the head of his campaign in Oakland County. And there was a continuation of this debate. Sandy Levin had lost the chairmanship of had left the state chairmanship of the state party. Jim McNeely had replaced him. Jim's position with labor and exactly where he was on all of these other issues was not clear. And there was a chairman in Macomb County by the name of John Bruff and a chairman of Wayne County by the name of Bruce Miller. And the three of us decided to have lunch together and start figuring out what we wanted to do as a Metro Democratic force. And that's sort of how I became a bit involved in state party stuff and had enough of a following and support to think about running for chairman in '72. '72, the Democratic Party in Michigan was completely wiped out. It had a debacle of election. Many people blamed the party chairman, Jim McNeely, for taking positions that hadn't necessarily been authorized around busing and other controversial social issues. And so labor refused to support him again. He walked away from it. And we ended up having a state party election that was between Bob Mitchell and myself, as well as an AFL candidate, Paul Donahue, that was really a liberal labor contest, with me being the UAW candidate.
All right, so there was an AFL candidate, a UAW candidate, and kind of the liberal candidate.
And the liberal candidate, and there was no decision on the first ballot. It was still a closely split party, and the AFL guy dropped out in exchange for a few favors, and I became party chairman on the second ballot.
Apparently, when you were running, you announced that the Michigan Democratic Party should be in the mainstream of American politics. That was that right? Was that what did you think you were going in as chair to accomplish? What did you think the party needed to do to be able to govern again in this state?
Yeah, I actually ran on a platform of working together to win. That was the Winograd slogan. And it was about unity and ending some of these debilitating internal fights we were having. And the mainstream comment was a shot at the McGovern supporters, who were still very active, and some of their policy positions. But I was pretty clear that the job of the state party chairman was to repair the nuts and bolts, the infrastructure of the party, and to let those policy debates take place in a fair and open environment without direction or decision from the party chair. That's how the last one had gotten in all kinds of trouble. And so I was basically saying, here's where I'm at, which is over here with labor, kind of in the center of American political thought at the time. They're over there on the left, but that doesn't mean we can't work together to win elections.
And the UAW, and that was that Sam Fishman at the time, or who was that?
Yeah, Sam was the statewide political director. My closest ally was a gentleman who took me under his wing in Oakland County, John Dewan. He was the Oakland County CAP director, but he and Sam were very good friends, and eventually Sam decided he could support me over the alternatives anyway.
Did they see you as a kind of, I mean, you were the suburban...
I was a small businessman. I mean, I worked for my father in a retail business.
So no labor ties, really.
I had zero labor ties, so I was a great person to represent their perspective without having it be characterized as simply a knee-jerk labor reaction. And it wasn't. I mean, I had nothing to do with the labor movement until I got involved in politics. I got educated. I understood a lot of it since and then, but I was interested in representing working class, middle class Democrats, and that fit very well with what labor wanted to do because those were their members.
And so what in fact became your priorities and focus? You get elected in '72. This is really fast. You're elected Oakland County chair in '70. You're how old now when you take the Michigan chairmanship?
Well,
you're 30.
Yeah, I turned 30 in November of '72, and the election was in February of '73. So I was 30 years old,
right?
And I completely screwed up the first year or so of my chairmanship. There was
some controversy.
Yeah, tons of controversy. I got in fights with the press, and I got crossways with the AFL-CIO, and the liberals were still suspicious of me. So I had a fairly disastrous first year as state party chair.
Why? Why
Well,
inexperience?
I was I mean, I was completely unprepared for that level of responsibility. I'd never done any public relations stuff. I didn't understand relationships with the press. So none of that worked. And I remember spending Christmas of '73 literally hunkered down in my basement waiting for, Doug Frazier, the UAW, to say, maybe we made a mistake and we got to find somebody else.